pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could we have a roll call of members?
Mr. Johnston, Mr. Francis, Mrs. Irwin Adams, Dr. Malloy,
Here.
Mr. Hoff, Mrs. McGinnis, Mr. Mignon,
Here.
Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Cook.
Okay, I see there's one item on the agenda, a preliminary budget analysis and an Easter review.
Good evening, folks. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. We do have a singleton item to discuss this evening. We've been talking about and looking at forward planning for the 24-25 budget year and budget cycle. We've got a lot of information coming at us in the last couple of weeks with the budget getting passed or partially passed, as well as looking at our current funding and then funding through the end of this school year and into 24-25. One of the pieces that we've talked about at length is the ESSER money and the COVID relief money coming to an end. And we've had a definitive plan, and by all contention, we've been successful in how we've implemented and utilized the funding that's been provided to the Alton Area School District in a number of different ways, which we're going to highlight tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to really look at our current status. Where are we in terms of our ESSER funding? Talking about the dates that money is expiring. There's rumors out there that there may be some extensions possibly coming down the line, and what that extension would be an extension of how long you can to utilize your funds. Not an extension in terms of being given additional monies or additional funding, but just additional time to be able to utilize the funding that you've already been allocated. So tonight we have a presentation to really review where we are. And once we've had an analysis of where we are, the upcoming months will then be planned for, okay, how do we address what our needs are? And how do we address the different decision-making pieces that we're going to have to look at moving forward as we start to plan for the 24-25 budget. So the presentation that you have at your places is a hard copy of what's going to be up on the board in the presentation area. This is very back and forth. So if you have questions or need clarification as we move through this, just punch in and we'll go through those as extensively and as
Thank you. And to give credit where credit is due, Sue actually worked on this, this presentation piece of it and pulled all the data for it last week before she left on Friday. So I thank her for that. And then before she left, we went over it with Brad and Mr. Harrington and Mrs. Flegel. So we took some direction from them and finished it up. So just as a timeline for tonight, we're going to review the effect that the ESSER funds have had on our budget, which have had a very positive impact. But we've been talking about it since January of 2021 in some form or fashion in every finance committee meeting in 21 and 22. And then last year's CALs were focused on finance. And we touched on these ESSER funds in every meeting. So none of this is going to come as any surprise to you. We have supplemented and supplanted, and we'll talk about that. But next month at the December CAL, we'll start our preliminary discussion, as Mr. Hatch noted, to address the deficit when the ESSER funds end and some of our other options. So the definitions of the definition for supplement is add-on. So when we hired social workers and instructional support staff and purchased additional air filters and those types of things, those have all been supplemental to the budget. They weren't part of our normal budget. We added on to increase our services to our students. Supplanting is taking those federal funds, which in the case of ESSER was allowed. And normally with federal funds, you are not allowed to supplant, where you would take federal funds and replace local funds with those federal funds to make your dollars go further. In this particular case, I believe we have maximized our use of being able to supplant, but we're also planning for what's going to happen when those supplanted funds have to come back into the general fund budget. And then while we were making those decisions, we were also keeping maintenance of effort in mind. Maintenance of effort is a part of the federal requirements that you have to support programs with the same level of local and state funding, and that's one of the ways they can find out if we supplanted, for instance, for Title I. We're not allowed to just go into a building and replace regular ed teachers with a Title I teacher to save local funding. And that maintenance of effort is how they will find out about it when we submit our annual financial report, the AFR, at the end of the year. They can tell in the columns how much instructional funding came from local, how much came from federal, and they do calculations at the state level. They particularly do it for special ed. And special ed, we have not been able to supplant with the IDEA funds. It was not allowed, and it's been totally supplemental, which means all of these, as we have been getting additional special ed teachers, as the IDEA funds will allow, we try to charge those new teachers to IDEA because we've added. It's not where we went in and took a current special ed teacher and then dropped in the IDEA. It has to be new positions. So that's just a little bit of background on how some of these decisions came about over the last couple of years. So on page 3 is a summary of our total expenditures and how much of those expenditures were ESSER expenditures. And when you have $40 million to spend, this is how it shakes out. Our ESSER 3 is scheduled to end next September of 24. That's what we have been preparing for, this fiscal cliff for next September. But as Mr. Hatch just mentioned, now there's some rumblings and some possibility that we may be able to extend the use of our funds through 24-25. We'll keep you posted on that. In my mind, that would be a great thing, because in 24-25, we could, and if we know about it soon enough, we could back off some of the supplanting we've done in this year's budget, push it into next year, and then smooth out that current supplanting fiscal cliff that's occurring, which we'll show in a later slide. Here are some of the good things we've been doing with the ESSER funds to supplement. Windows, which that's not part of the general fund budget, so it's not supplanting, but it's part of our operations. We would have to transfer money from the general fund to the capital reserve fund to have covered these windows. So this was definitely a windfall, and we're getting some projects taken care of sooner than later with the use of these funds. Replacing curriculum and replacing technology. The planetarium, you may remember, I think it was about 18 months ago that Mr. Krug came in and provided a presentation to the board to replace one of the projectors in the planetarium. ESSER funds were used for that. We've had large summer schools to help the kids get back some of the learning loss, to address some of their learning loss needs. And some of those grants were written to cover just the transportation. The additional support salary and wages are the social workers and the instructional intervention support at the junior high and the high school that we mentioned earlier. And the summer schools have been free to all students of the district. We have only charged outside districts if the students were coming for a phys ed or health program or another program, but all of our students have gone to summer school for the last 2 summers for free. But they've been fully staffed, and it's come at a cost that is coming out of ESSER funds. And then there was the retention bonus in 21-22 that was supplemental, not a supplanted expenditure. On the next slide.
Just, Camille, if I could just add, so essentially the items in this table are items that we otherwise would have likely not been able to do. So there were provisions within ESSER and within CARES that money had to be allocated to be spent in certain ways in a certain time period. Had we not had the additional funding, projects like the doors and window projects, free summer school for all, learning loss enrichment camps, those types of things, the addition of some of our counselors, the addition of social workers and those types of things that we have added, we would have not been able to do under normal circumstances. So those were pieces that we added in that time frame. Some of them were one and done. Some of them are going to be considered if we are able to sustain them moving forward. Obviously, the last 3 years have brought about special educational needs with our students, some of which are not going to go away. And some of these are pieces that were adds, that were supplements that we are going to have to look at considering for whether we're going to be able to continue in the future and really prioritizing what those are. But a lot of these were one and done. They were, as Camille had mentioned, supplement. They weren't something that we were in place of. They were in addition to. Go ahead.
So if you move on to slide 6, this is the ESSER supplanting. So we've been picking up the secondary substitutes through ESS, and I was using secondary so we wouldn't affect the maintenance of effort at the elementary level. Since all our title money goes into the elementaries, I wanted to keep those expenditures as level as possible at the elementary level. The Cyber Academy hotspots and the internet and some other of the supplies are in that Cyber Academy line. Their actual salaries and wages are down in the wages and benefits because we've been taking all the ACA salaries and benefits as supplanting, as well as all secondary electives. And that for 22-23, that's a total of $5.1 million. We've been taking the GACTC tuition, supplementing or supplanting it out of ESSER. 2.6, 2.3, 2.9 for budgeted for next year. Technology, while Bryce has been submitting a budget in general fund, we have only been using a portion of it and then supplanting the rest out of ESSER. And then those wages and benefits, again, as I said, it's secondary electives and all of the Cyber Academy salaries and benefits. The next slide
Camilla,
shows.
before you go on.
Mhm.
Okay, I know during all of our budget discussions last year, we kept talking about the need to try to make up particularly the supplanted money as much as possible, either through local or state revenues. And I thought we had a pretty good understanding of that till budget night, where we had to approve a budget. Because I heard some of the board members' objection was that there weren't cuts. And if we had made cuts to personnel, to some of these areas covered by these ESSER monies, we basically would be giving the money back, right? Okay, so we had to add, to the 2021 budget, you can see the total amount. When you add 655,038 and 2,813,782 on that page 4, we added almost 3.5 million. 2021, we added 10.7. The next year, 22, 23, 11.5, and 23, 24, 10.6. Okay, so those numbers did definitely inflate our budget. But on the other hand, we were concerned of trying to make up particularly that supplanted amount, because that's the money that's not once and done, that's going to still be here once the ESSER funds go away. So I think that's something a lot of board members apparently didn't understand. And I thought we had a pretty good understanding of it throughout all of our discussions. And even the nights where we had an opportunity to say, well, let's make cuts. What cuts do you want to make? And you even gave us some possibilities or potential cuts. Nobody spoke up till budget night. And I'm leaving the board, but I'm going to tell you, your responsibility, your fiscal responsibility is to pay the bills. You can't vote for things that add expenditures and not plan on paying for them. So I don't know. I just get frustrated. I was very frustrated that night with what I saw happening.
Well, just go ahead and jump to the last slide. This is our projection of revenue without ESSER, expenditures without ESSER, then adding back in what we have supplanted that needs to go back into the budget, so you can get an idea of what the true deficit would have been. So in 2021, it would have been almost 8 million. And then in 21, 22, 7.8. And in 22, 23, we are projecting that it will be about 3.5 million. It would be 3.5 million if we didn't have ESSER funding. So what this tells me is, and I think this is a good indication, if you look at the revenue without ESSER, there is some good news in all of this. We have realized increases from basic ed subsidy last year, and the year before we received Level Up. Doesn't look too promising this year, but in the years that we received the Level Up, it actually rolled into our basic ed subsidy. So it's not a one-time thing. It rolls in, and so it's cumulative, and we will continue with that. Then we have had, over the last 5 years, we've had 3 tax increases. Now, this last one for last year was primarily earmarked for those increases in security, where we increased greeters in all buildings and raised their rates so we could try to attract some more personnel, as well as offering them benefits. So that increase, that covered additional expenditures, but we've done a good job, or we're in a better spot now than we were 2 years ago, from the difference between 7.9 and 3.5. Now, next year, we have all the increases in the contractual increases in our salaries, and then utilities have gone up, and the transportation contract went up. So that's reflected in the 23-24 estimated deficit. But we are working toward narrowing that gap and getting closer to a balanced budget, but we still have a lot of work to do. And then that's what we're going to start those conversations in December.
So, I mean, essentially, we've cut functional deficit almost in half during the time, and that is not a function of ESSER. That is through wise spending and looking at, making positive choices. We have cut functional deficit, which is what's going to be realized in 24-25. The real piece, and if we go back to the previous slide, is that dollar amount that has been supplanted. So if we continue to fund those things at the same level that they are at right now, the reality is that we will have to find a way to work that $8 million back into our normal budget. Because that additional money is not there. Now, as Camilla said, if we get an extension, we can spread it out and smooth it over 2 years as opposed to one. But the reality is we have to look critically at every dollar, how it's being spent, every position, anywhere where we can realize savings. I think we'll talk more about specifics in December, but we've been very fortunate in some areas, like our insurance program and some other places where we have been very fortunate to realize significant savings that is added to reduction of deficit. So that being said, we wanted everyone to have a true understanding of where we are in terms of right now, and just assume that ESSER doesn't get extended and we're at the end of ESSER funding, where we need to be for 24-25 budgetary spending. We need to look at programming. We need to look at personnel. We need to look at, we have one more full year before we are renegotiating with most of our collective bargaining groups. So that's another thing in terms of longer term planning that we need to look at in terms of adjustments and considerations moving forward. So tonight was really about, did we get to the last slide? We're good with the, okay. So we wanted to give you a general overview of where we are. And when you look at numbers, it may seem bleak. However, I will tell you that Camilla and her team has done an excellent job of looking at where we are actual dollars and cents wise in terms of budgetary. And even though we have to absorb a good chunk of what we've supplanted over the past couple of years back into general fund, we feel very confident that we're going to be able to find efficiencies that are going to enable us to do that without a significant increase to our deficit. It's going to require some conversation and some really looking at how we're utilizing our dollars, but the programming that we're providing our students will always be our number one priority, and making sure that we're funding that to the level that we need to do to basically provide our kids, both educationally, from a mental health standpoint, extracurricular opportunities, everything that we've been able to do to this point with a great deal of success. So all that being said, I think we kind of want to open it up to, want to go back and look at anything, questions or clarifications, further discussion about current status.
One of the things that we need to remember are bond refinancing. Okay, that's going to be reflected in this year's AFR, right? And the cost per pupil is going to jump somewhat because of that, because when we were making comparisons to other school districts, I know we got a little bit of flack when we reported holidays per cost per pupil as being relatively high, and that was due to bond refinancing. So we're going to have the same scenario for our report this year. Is that correct?
You're right. Correct.
So I think you need to have a little footnote on that,
I would just offer, we're going to be turning over a board here, like 5 new members, and is a really critical year. And what will be by the end of their term, which, 4 years from December, we could be in, some serious times. And I see one of the candidates here. I would just, if they hear this, I would implore that these people maybe make the attempt to get ahead of the curve, start reading, start researching, learn what you can, because we're going to have to hit the ground running this year. And I know how difficult it was, for me coming on board to learn all the that I've learned so far. And there's a serious learning curve. So, we're going to have 5 new board members, and I think it's incumbent upon them to come pretty seriously prepared. I hope they don't wait till December to dig into this stuff, and because we're going to have some hard work ahead of us, and probably somewhere down the line, not very popular work, possibly. So I would just implore them to be prepared.
And I think another thing to keep in mind, what were the effects of COVID on our children? And when you think about it, there's a whole year that they basically had online learning. They weren't in school. And what effect has that had on their learning process? And there's research out on this, and it doesn't look good. And if you read that research, you're going to find that for the most part, kids are about a half year behind. And how do you make up a half year of school, a school year? How many, 900 hours, 990 for secondary, 180 year school, 180 day school year? How do you make up 90 days? Do you extend hours? Do you go to summer school? And every school district in this country has this same dilemma. How do we catch these kids up? Are we going to have a generation of kids who are left behind? You know, I was working through a period, it was called No Child Left Behind. Well, now we have a whole country full of children that we can leave behind educationally if we don't try to catch them up. And I think it has a critical degree of importance for this country to address that. And I think anybody who looks at school budgets and says, or, you know, I see on Facebook some of these people criticizing schools for their inflated budgets over the years. It's going to have to be inflated to meet kids' needs. So I think future boards, it's not going to be an easy road to hoe, but it's going to have to be done.
There was a study, I think I read a study, a large percentage of fourth graders are not reading up to their level.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had a parent during COVID that watched their kids and worked with their kids, those kids excelled. I think what our kids lost was sociability during COVID. And if you, like I said, if you had parents that watched their kids and made sure that they did their work, they're there. They're at their reading level. And like I said, all it was the social aspect. They lost that. That's a big hit for kids to lose it.
We'll say, so I was at a superintendent retreat a week and a half ago, and one of the speakers was the Secretary of Ed, and very much acknowledged the need for additional funding and the deficit spending that we have with special ed, the increase in the number of students being identified, the increased cost of service. It was shortly thereafter that they did approve the mental health and safe schools money that will be allocated to school districts. So we don't know our exact number yet, but it's pretty significant that we will be able to utilize for mental health purposes as well as our safety and security. There's some bills in the Senate and Congress right now that are looking at funding school security measures at the state level, and not just one and done, but long term. So those are good things that are out there. We do have a governor that is at least examining school funding as well as cyber charter reform. So there are some pieces out there at the legislative level that are encouraging. At the state level, not so much at the federal level, but at the state level, to really acknowledge, with the lawsuit that was won, the inequity with the basic funding formula, there is work being done to right some of those wrongs, but it's just not there yet. But it is optimistic at the legislative level that there will be some movement at the state level in order to help schools like us, to help school districts such as us.
Refresh my memory. Did we hire a grant writer?
We did, Mr. Schote, and he's working very closely with Ms. Flegel, and they're doing good work. We've been able to secure some private grants that are going to enhance and allow us to do some different things. Where we're at now is we're trying to utilize grant funding to maintain programs that we already have in place. Like, we put a comprehensive mental health program in elementary that's utilizing a local service provider to provide mental health services that never existed before in our elementary students. We're trying to catch them younger. We would love to be able to utilize and sustain that moving forward. And I'm sure that the partner that we have with us would be more than willing to do that. We've seen huge benefits from that. Our social workers and some of the other mental health providers are interventionists. So the interventionists are those educators that are working on filling in those academic and achievement gaps with these students that do have learning loss and are behind. So they're working specifically with kids that have demonstrated that they're not at grade level, and being able to maintain them and their support will be vital in trying to catch kids up, especially with title money at the younger kids. It's helping secondary that had not had that support before. when we get kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that are reading well below grade level, to try to get them to a point where they are functional within grade level and that they are achieving at a level where they can progress forward through high school. So the monies that we're looking at securing, we would like nothing more than to be, we're not looking to add anything. We're looking to maintain what we currently have that we feel like has been successful in our programming. Haley, Martha, do you guys want to, I mean, that's pretty accurate in terms of where we're at? I think especially with the mental health and the security piece. So this security money that we get, if it can help alleviate some of the money that the board generously allocated for the improvements at the elementary level and with some of our facilities, if it can offset some of our local effort on that, then that will go a long way in making sure that we're able to maintain that security at our buildings. That pretty much summarize it.
Hey, can I mention,
Mhm.
you know, the armed security greeter initiative here? Obviously all for it, wanted to protect everyone. Wasn't sure who we'd find to fill this role. And I had an encounter with a gentleman who, and I don't have permission to name him, but he's designated at one of the elementary schools and he was working a 7th grade football game. And I was blown away, touched, inspired by his state of mind, his attitude towards the job he does. And I was just thinking, man, if we had a bunch of these guys, we're good. I mean, our children and staff will be protected. And I just really left there feeling really good about everybody on the board and supporting that decision. And again, seeing a guy like him and his attitude, if we had a bunch of hims, we're in good shape.
So one of the things we did a beginning of the year survey. It's been about 5 weeks. We wanted to find out from all of our staff. We asked them, what's one thing that's gone well, one thing that has not gone well, and one suggestion that you might have. And that survey actually closed today. So we had about 300 responses and we started to go through that. They could put their name or not put their name, put their building, not put their building. But one of the biggest comments of one thing that's gone well was the appreciation for the additional security measures at the elementary buildings. And just from a feeling standpoint, how much better people felt going to work and how much kids had expressed and families had expressed how much more secure they felt having that person at the door in a locked vestibule with a process in place for entry and exit of the building. So again, I can't thank you guys enough. I know Billy presented at the last one of the last meetings, but it has made a world of difference. We're still working on getting them all the certifications that they need, getting them there because the weekends they have to do their 235, their shooting training on the weekends. It's a couple weekends in a row, but we have a full staff hired. I'm happy to report we have people that are onboarded for every building, just getting them finalized, trained, and getting them their 235 certification to be able to carry is the last piece of that. But I couldn't agree with you more. The people that I've encountered and the folks that we've hired, they're doing it for the right reason. And they're in it for the community and for the kids. And it shows. I mean, that welcoming face, that common face that they see every morning, that does make a difference with all of our kids.
And I want to just say, I should have said hims and hers. So I apologize for that because I know we have some women out there on our security force. So I do acknowledge that.
One of the other things that we didn't really touch about, and we'll get to in more detail. So we try to think forward when we had this money available. What can we do now with money that we know is going to go away that we would like to do 3, 5, 7 years down the road? So your window and door projects, those are things that we otherwise probably would not have been able to do. And those are things that likely would have needed to be done in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years had we not done them. So we were able to take money that had to be allocated in particular areas and do projects that we knew might come on down the line that we will not have to allocate monies for over the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. Now, the unforeseens is always a possibility. You could have a roof that could go tomorrow. We could have to look at a capital project for that. We're already dealing with the wall over at the IM field. Those things are unavoidable. However, curriculum purchases, we front loaded every curriculum purchase that we could do. So any dollar that we could spend on curriculum and curriculum purchases, then we will not have to do over the next 3 to 5 years. And I would say we're in a pretty good spot, pretty much K to 12, where we have almost everything renewed or already revisited that will need to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So whereas we might have normally allocated $2 million for curriculum purchases, we may be able to cut that in half or even more, because we've already done the work on that. We've already front loaded that with ESSER money and CARES money, and we've already taken care of that. So when we look at where these efficiencies going to come from, how are we going to find that $8 million? We've already done a lot of that work. We've already put in the investment, and we front loaded the investment, knowing that this was coming to an end, and knowing that we would be in a position, with Bryce's position, with technology, with infrastructure. And you guys have always been great about approving infrastructure upgrades, things that we knew were going to come at some point. And we were able to front load those purchases and those projects to get them done. So that way, when we got to the point where we had to be lean, we could be lean and not really impact things that would impact students in programming. So the people that have been part of that piece, Haley in particular, along with Camille in the business office, have done a really phenomenal job at getting as much done as we could while we had the funding available that had to be spent. That's the piece, like they had to be allocated. A certain percentage of ESSER had to be spent here. Certain percentage had to be spent there. Facility upgrades with the windows and improving, some of those pieces. That's why we did the windows and door projects, because it had to be allocated. We had to get that approved to be qualified under those different areas. So they've done a lot of the work ahead of time, knowing we were going to get to this point. This isn't a surprise. We knew we were going to get here. Like, we planned for this. So it's a matter of now we just got to put in the pieces and do what we need to do to make sure that we can absorb it without a lot of pain and a lot of hurt.
Camilla, will we be able to do what we did last year? I think it's really helpful, especially if you're new to the board, to view things in that manner where you can look at your own budget year to year, but it's really helpful to compare us to other school districts and see what percentage of, our expenditures are in this and that as compared to other school districts throughout the state. I think that's very helpful for people.
We have all those templates in place. All we have to do is drop in the most current numbers and go with Brad and the board's direction on how detailed you want to get. Because as you may recall, we started it last fall, and we took athletics, we took student activity funds. We hit a lot of different areas that we may want to condense into one meeting. But to your point, it would be valuable for new members to be able to see that. But I need to work with Brad on how he wants that presented.
We've already started to look at some of the bigger ticket items. If you look at where heavy dollars are spent, our own cyber academy in supplementing our in-person learning programs with our cyber learning, how can we make that more efficient? Reduction of our outside cyber payments. Mr. McGinnis has been working unbelievably diligently, calling every family that is in an outside cyber placement to try to bring them back into one of our programs, because each one of those students, that in reality is a 10 to 12 or more, $1,000 savings per kid. And he's already brought whole families of kids back. So reduction of that number, as well as being as efficient as we can to provide our own programming, are two pieces that we're looking at. And then also looking at, we don't want to cut programs. We don't want to, reduce opportunities for kids, but can we do it more efficiently and make sure we're investing in the things that we're getting bang for the buck out of? And that's really what our focus is and has been as we're moving forward into bringing those ideas and concepts to the board in December.
I think some of the key things I heard sitting here with some board members, like Ron pointed out a number of times, the idea of preventive maintenance and how long-term that can save money. But I'm sure over the years when monies were tight, a lot of the monies that were used for preventive maintenance were probably taken out of the budget. And I know when I worked here, one of the things you would hear people say who visited our district was, boy, your building and grounds are just beautiful. It looks like you just put some of these buildings together. And I know I used to I still do go to Irving pretty often to volunteer there, but I'd see Mike and I never would fail to tell him, I hope I didn't, Mike, that how great the building looked. And I think preventive maintenance is one thing. And this is probably this is our last committee of the whole for Dave, Ron, and myself and Eric. during my day, committee of the whole was that. You didn't have all these separate committee meetings because most of it was done at the committee of the whole. I would say the exceptions would be the athletic committee and the facilities. But for the most part, the work of the board was done in a fully transparent way because you see the press is here. Do you go to committee meetings?
So
For what? But do you go to like the education committee or do you go to the technology committee? No. But when you have those discussions here, it's with the whole board and it's totally transparent. So I'm going to leave my last committee, the whole meeting saying, make it more efficient. You know, watch your time because you'll wear board members out. And I was out at Spring Cove. They were, and who you wear out to is your administrators. They have to attend all these meetings. And it gets to be more than a job when your day is 5 days a week, 15, 20 hours a week. So I don't know. I just think things could be much more efficient if you use committee of the whole for what it's intended to be used for. But that's just my suggestion. You're the board, you decide what you want to do. To me, committee, most of the committee discussions can come back to the full board anyways, you know, for approval or whatever. So avoid yourself a couple hours in an evening, just present it here. That's my parting shot.
And we can definitely discuss that moving forward. I know there is some good work that comes out of the facility committee meetings. And I also know that, for example, we didn't feel like we needed a facilities meeting this coming Thursday. So we decided to cancel that, knowing that we could accomplish that work either through email or through other contacts. One thing I did want to just mention, our committee of the whole in December will be after the reorganization and voting meeting in December. The intent of that meeting will be a very brief state of the district meeting. I know that we've said very brief before, and it's gone into a couple of hours. It will be a half an hour. There will be a half an hour state of the district, and then followed by our finance piece that we would like to address the next step in terms of looking at considerations moving forward. So the December CAL will be a two-part. It will be a committee of the whole to go over state of the district. And I think that'll be a good time to catch up the new board members and to give them an overview of where we are. And then also we can reiterate the meeting that we talked about tonight, give them a global view of the finances, and then start to have those conversations about 24-25 budget planning. So there is some stuff out there. I don't know if you've seen it as well. We may be forced into doing some things earlier this year. They are looking at potentially back or moving up the primaries. They're currently in April. If they move it to an earlier date in April or an earlier date in March, that will then speed up some of the different pieces that we have to do as a board. So there's potential that in November, when we do our Act 1 index vote, which is that you agree not to raise taxes to more than the index. It's not agreeing to any kind of tax increase, but we may have to do that vote in November instead of January, depending on what happens with the primary schedule. So if the primary schedule gets moved up, that moves us up in terms of our schedule for what we have to do with budgetary planning. So there'll be more to come once if that would happen, we'll let you know right away and make sure that everyone's aware of what needs to take place. Camilla, anything I need to add? Questions from anyone? Really
I have
appreciate
one thing.
Yep.
Thank Frank for the kind words with the preventive maintenance. Another thing we have a really nice capital fund, don't we? It's that's very important too. For we may call that like a rainy day fund. Some furnace breaks, air conditioner breaks. We're doing pretty good on that also.
We are, and Sue can go over that in December on some of the projects that are hot fires right now that we'll use the capital reserve to cover some of those. The wall being one of them. The IM field wall is one of them. Brad alluded to.
Yeah,
a roof.
the chiller we had discussed is another one that's going to be a high priority. But I mean, we do have capital reserve right now. The importance of continuing to fund capital reserve cannot be stressed enough. The more that we're basically paying ourselves. The more that we can pay ourselves and the more that we can invest and allocate into capital reserve provides us with that nest egg in the event that we want to do long-term planning, or in the event it's a rainy day fund, in the event that you have something unexpected that we need to be able to fund relatively quickly. So it's pretty, I want to say we're 3 point something right now, depending on existing projects. But that's an important piece that we need to continue to, essentially we're paying ourselves so that when we have money, if we do a property sale, whatever it may be, we can continue to fund that piece of it, because that goes directly allocated to exactly what you're talking about. So that's very important.
And the biggest piece about being able to handle some of these bigger projects out of capital reserve, and the reason we've been stressing trying to keep it funded, is because if you start a project in June and it goes over the summer, you've just crossed fiscal years and you've just crossed 2 budgets. So you would have to budget it in the general fund. And there's not a lot of wiggle room when a chiller blows and it's $400,000. It can quickly blow your general fund budget. So it's worked out really well that we have been covering these large projects out of capital reserve, and we thank you for the transfers from general fund over to capital reserve, so we're prepared when things happen, and without blowing our general fund budget or having to pad it by $1 million for a contingency of having chillers go out or a roof go or a field wall fall.
Okay, we have a voting meeting in 2 weeks. We have a voting meeting in November. And then obviously we'll have the 2 meetings then in December. So I know it's the last Cal, and we'll see you at some other board meetings, but those of you that are cycling off, you've been incredible board members and bring a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience. We want to thank you for that. And your ideas and practicality have really brought a lot of balance to our board and have really made these meetings very productive. So thank you to everyone that's been a part of that. And thank you to those of you that are continuing on with us, because you do very important work for very little gratitude. So thank you very much.
Okay, so those are all the items on the agenda. Anybody have anything else? If not, the meeting's adjourned.